I'm Mutisia. I work with a church organization in Kenya. I want to thank civil society in America. It's the first time that I've had the other side of America. And I want to congratulate you and I want to encourage you. I would like to say that my knowledge of WTO is older than the Bush administration. Seattle happened during another administration. And for us working in Africa, we've always thought that it's the official policy of the American government to dominate, manipulate, and flout rules. So we want to welcome you to strengthen our silent voices of the multitudes of people suffering in Africa, the Latin Americas, and Asia who are dying and succumbing to injustices and discrimination. And we just want to encourage you to be a little more audible and visible, because as I'm saying here, I'm quite well exposed and I've never had that side of America. So thank you so much.
I started following the World Trade Organization in 2003. The ministerial conference in Cancun was the second conference of the Doha Round of trade negotiations. For 5 decades, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs had negotiated international trade and customs laws. The GATT system met every 2 years in 5-day-long ministerial conferences. A series of conferences were referred to as trade rounds. The 1989 GATT conference in Punta del Este, Uruguay, created the World Trade Organization. The first 5 years of this new international commerce court were called the Uruguay Round. At the Seattle Ministerial in 1999, developing countries whose economies had been devastated by the Uruguay Round blocked the launch of a new round of WTO negotiations. But the following ministerial in 2001 launched the second round, called the Doha Round, after the Qatari capital.
What are these guys doing there? Doing the whole week in a big thing like that, and demonstrators and firemen and police. If you tell them it's about formulas, they won't believe you. We're not on another planet. We're not somewhere in the air. And it worked in Cancun, and I'm pretty glad it worked in here. The problem, of course, is that, I don't have many resources in WTO. I will not answer the questions myself.
Well, because we didn't have agreement in Cancun, many people assumed that this was a disastrous outcome. It was certainly disappointing. And the failure to reach agreement in Cancun meant that we were not going to conclude this round on schedule. The timetable set in Doha, we have to finish this negotiation. Because the president's authority to negotiate trade agreements will expire in the middle of 2007. Any agreement must be sent to Capitol Hill for consideration in April.
The United States Trade Representative's office couldn't emphasize enough that Cancun was only the midpoint in the round. It seemed like the USTR was planning on some poor countries walking out because they had been forced to leave Doha before the final vote.
It was almost as though the WTO had to take their meeting to a very inaccessible corner of the earth in order to launch its new round, because the only way trade ministers, I think the easiest way for trade ministers to put together a new round is when they can remove themselves physically from their own domestic constituencies, like labor and business and environment and other civil society groups. And most of the talk in Doha was trade negotiators and media congratulating themselves on having taken the meeting to a place where protesters couldn't reach them.
The World Trade Organization's system of voting was criticized by non-governmental organizations in developing countries after the launch of the Doha Round in 2001. But the absence of some delegations from the final vote is all but forgotten at the following conference in Cancun.
Explicit consensus, we're all against the new issues here. We don't want NAFTA stuck in the back door of the WTO. Anyone who wants to wear this in all the languages we could come up with, reminding people that the actual terms for launching any of these dreadful talks is explicit consensus, of which there is none. We'd be happy to provide them.
So what started to happen with these 2 days ago is when we arrived at the convention center, we were told to take them off. And we were told to hand them over to the security people. I mean, a friend of mine, for example, had this taken off her on a bus by the Mexican army. They climbed onto the bus, and everybody who was wearing one of these had it taken away.
Explicit consensus. Yeah, this is a funny term. I don't know what an implicit consensus is, actually. This was a term that came up in Doha. I don't know if it's being used in any other context. It meant that everyone had to go along.
And during the protest, we were in contact with them. They put down the fence of globalization, of WTO, whatever meaning the fence had for them.
The sensation of a collapsed meeting gave the protesters, and indeed the world, the impression that the demonstrations, along with the suicide of South Korean Federation of Farmers and Fisheries President Lee Kyung-hae, had stopped the round, much like the Seattle ministerial. But it was a carefully arranged mid-round illusion. Instead of a walkout, which would have meant an end to the Doha Round, the WTO arranged a collapsed meeting led by Kenya. This kept the negotiations going and ensured Kenya continental dominance, along with South Africa, upon completion of the Doha Round.
No, it's not a walkout, it's a collapse meeting.
Collapse meeting, okay. In fact, rules need to be introduced because the WTO is supposed to be a rules-based organization, but it's a power-based organization, and we are not ready to accept that. If anything, we are taking the power back. The people who are being disadvantaged under the WTO are the majority, not only in Africa, not only in Asia, not only in developing countries, even in the North. And we must take the power back from these few people who go into green rooms and manipulate the rest of us.
Martinez said, Celso, all of us, the hallmark of this new group is its professional competence, the amount of capacity it has, and the fact that we focused on the issues in some very detailed proposals, and we'll carry those detailed proposals forward into Geneva. And I think this is a change in the quality and nature of negotiation between the developing countries and the developing.
The newly formed group of 20 large developing countries gave the least developed countries some hope that their concerns about agriculture would finally be taken seriously by the US and the EU.
Right now, it's a generally accepted concept, but it takes time. That's the problem. Everybody says, my own Director General can openly state rich countries should get rid of their subsidies.